How are you?
You good?
I think I'm good, yeah. Let's see. Thank you.
Okay, we'll continue. Okay, this is the Committee of the Whole. We have 2 items for discussion this afternoon. Our first item is discussion of capital facilities. Staff will present additional information related to capital facilities and the adopted citywide policies that guide city investments in capital facilities, including, but not limited to, streets, sidewalks, buildings, open spaces. The city's capital program is encapsulated by a number of existing policies and documents, such as the capital facility plan as adopted per the comprehensive plan, and other programmatic documents such as the transportation improvement plan, bicycle master plan, and pedestrian master plan, among others. And here to take us through is Mayor Catlin and Ted Carlson.
Yeah, I'm just going to introduce this, and then I have some closing remarks. But I think the main thing is this is a first attempt to put the context of the capital costs that we have in perspective. There are the transportation costs, which usually we think about when we're talking about Public Works Department, and it also then will bring up the facilities needs that we have not been addressing adequately. So it'll just be a contextual, kind of give you all more information as you look forward to the decisions that you may or may not want to make.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. As the mayor mentioned, council requested some work session on capital, which obviously is a very broad topic. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about capital maintenance needs. We spent a lot of time talking about capital as it relates to growth and the comprehensive plan to deal with capacity issues, and also as it relates to level of service. We'll talk a little bit about capital maintenance, but then also a little bit about facilities specifically at the end. So council is very familiar with the general capital facilities planning process as it relates to the capital comprehensive plan, more detailed in the pro plan. Bicycle master plan and ped plan are specific mode plans that have been incorporated into the comprehensive plan. So we're looking at a very long-term horizon, 20 years, going out to 2036. And then we work down through the 6-year plans that council approves, the 6-year TIP, the 6-year capital facilities plan in the biennial budget, and then the biennial budget itself. While we do that, we do consider, in addition to the policies and goals in the comprehensive plan, other documents, and we presented on this recently, the FAST report that was done back just after the recession, during the recession, to kind of help guide us as we move forward. A couple of the guiding policies are highlighted here that have to do with really capital maintenance, repairing the assets that the city already owns, really trying to invest in those assets as they are the city's largest assets, specifically looking at city buildings or municipal buildings. And the terminology gets confusing at times because we talk capital facilities, that's all capital, utilities, parks, streets, and not just buildings. So I'll try to be clear when I'm talking about buildings, municipal buildings, rather than facilities, because that can be a little bit confusing. And then obviously we spent quite a bit of time recently talking about multimodal options as that relates to bicycle master plan, pedestrian master plan, and those things. So specifically as we talk about transportation, when we look at those larger projects that we talk a lot about in the comp plan, there's, going out 20 years, you have $175 million or so of transportation projects identified in the comprehensive plan, and then 200 million plus in the bike and ped plan. But what we don't talk as much about is maintaining those existing assets. And so when we look at capital maintenance, and that's the term that we use, street resurfacing, that's the largest expense. We generally do around $2.5 million a year. Sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's combined with other projects, so we don't do specific just preservation projects, but generally $2.5 million a year. When we look at our condition index, so we go out every couple of years and we rate all of the pavement condition to try to kind of get a benchmark. Where should we be? What level should we be investing at? And we would need to increase that investment quite a bit to get us up to an industry standard, something that we would like to do, and then on average be spending $5 to $6 million a year. There are years we do that much, but generally it's short of that. So something that we probably need to look at a little bit. Sidewalk replacement. This dollar amount here, the $500,000 to $750,000 a year, that's out of our operations group. That's just ongoing contracts going out, fixing trip hazards, things like that. Sometimes we'll address intersections and put in the current ADA requirements in terms of wheelchair accessibility. But that's an ongoing operational cost. A little bit harder to really pull all that information out because we do a lot of sidewalk work as part of larger capital projects. For instance, the rotor overlay that we're going to be putting in the buffered bike lane. We're also replacing all of the ADA ramps throughout that corridor. That's not in this dollar amount. That's in a separate capital contract.
Probably got a question here from Councilmember Barker.
On the back, when you show how much we need for resurfacing and how much we do, and then you show how much we do currently are doing for sidewalks, how much if we were doing enough over the next 5
Yeah,
to
for
6
sidewalks.
years?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to pull that out. I think that's actually not a bad number right there, that 500 to 70.
We're hitting that, okay?
With that part of the work, going out and doing trip hazard replacements, things like that. When you look at overall, we probably spend another close to $1 million a year on sidewalk improvements that are part of a larger capital project. Again, an example would be like road or something like that. So it's a little bit between both operations and capital when we look at sidewalks. So that's a good question. So we want to provide the general funding associated with transportation. Obviously, council is aware of this. When we look at the sales tax there, the street fund actually gets about $9 million a year in sales tax. At least that's what we're projecting for 2019. About $7 million of that, and I'm talking about that top sales tax, that's the city's general sales tax that comes in. Only about $2 million of that is put aside for capital type projects. $7 million is for operational costs, talking about things like traffic signals, street lights, general patching, gravel, maintenance on alleys, things like that. So we're able to pull out about $2 million to go towards our capital program. Obviously, we've got the TBD that's been very helpful and successful in helping us do sidewalk and resurfacing. The fuel tax is about $2 million. That's the city's portion of the state fuel tax. That's a per capita distribution. It's been really flat. It's been about that amount for the last 10 years. It's gone up a little bit, but been around $1.7 to $2 million now for about a decade. And then impact fees associated with new development has also been relatively flat at around $1 million a year. We wanted to talk a little bit about some of the regulatory and legal requirements as it relates to investing in our infrastructure. Again, things we don't talk as much about. The council, though, is very familiar with the environmental responsibilities down at the waterfront. For instance, our remediation projects. We've got quite a bit of liability there in terms of future capital costs, around $35 million. Hopefully about half of that will be funded through MACA funds from the state, but that's the total liability. And then culvert replacement, something we're going to hear a lot more about, I think, in the future. You may be familiar with the state court case where DOT is now responsible to remove all fish barriers in the DOT's culverts over a fairly aggressive time period. And we expect that will be also coming to the local jurisdictions. But regardless, it's good practice, and we spend a lot of money in habitat restoration. You heard from Annalise earlier today. We've identified our 33 highest priority culverts. That's not all of the culverts, but those are the culverts that, if they were improved, would open up the most amount of habitat. And we put that dollar amount at about $55 million total for those 33. And then we talked a little bit about American with Disabilities Act. We're in the process of updating our transition plan. That's the document that local governments are required to have that shows how are we going to get to from our current status to a place where we're fully compliant with ADA. And that looks at all of the facilities within the rights of way as well as our city buildings. That process is underway right now. We know that's going to be a large number. It's something that the city's committed to do. It's a good thing to be working on, and we have been. But cities our size, the updated numbers are going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars to get to that. And the transition plan will give us a horizon to do that. What's important that the city's working towards being fully compliant. So there is some time to get where we need to be. One of the challenges with those specific requirements is there really is no dedicated funding. The city doesn't have dedicated funding. It's really a mix of sometimes some solid waste fund, which is really general tax, that's utility tax on all solid waste operations within the city. And council has directed that money to go towards solid waste and environmental remediation projects. But in large part, it's going to be general fund, general taxation to try to address those issues. And now into the facilities, which I think is hopefully the meat of this and where we'd like to talk the most about, is looking at our existing municipal buildings. We've talked a little bit about this over recent years. In general, the buildings need some work. Many of them are in a poor condition, and that's based on a condition assessment that the city did, going out and looking with a third-party consultant, looking at all of our buildings, all of the systems within the buildings, so roofs, mechanicals, electrical, all of the individual systems within all of our facilities. And that extends beyond the typical city hall, federal building, library to facilities in parks. So we looked at shelters and things that are not just large buildings, but structures. And we know we have some work to do there as well. The study showed that we should be investing $5 to $6 million a year, and that would get us up to kind of an industry benchmark. We've been doing better. This year, we have $600,000 this year, so $1.2 million over the biennium just for general facilities maintenance, and that is an increase on what we've been spending recently. And then specifically $1 million towards Central Library, and that's going to address several of the issues over there from a functionality perspective, but also address some issues related to the systems that are in need of repair. Again, that's about $1 million to the Central Library. In addition to having facilities that need some work in terms of bringing them up to appropriate condition, we also have buildings that functionally are not necessarily meeting the purpose and need to be addressed. And so we've identified a few. The two that come to the surface are really the Watcom, that's the 911 dispatch building, as well as Muni Court. And Terry and Gene will remember Muni Court was intended to be a much shorter purpose than it is, and we've been getting it to a point where it's serviceable, but it definitely needs some work to be a modern court facility. So we looked at those two buildings, and certainly additional analysis is needed, but we think there's an opportunity there for a replacement building, combining some functions perhaps into a new building on some property that the city owns. The buildings are really to the point now where reinvesting in those buildings is probably not the most prudent strategy. We probably need to start over with a new building because they're in such a state of disrepair. So when we look at the funding sources that are available for municipal buildings, you're again really talking about, in addition to general fund revenues, so sales tax, property tax, B&O and utility tax, real estate excise tax, and real estate excise taxes it's variable. We've seen that go up and down, obviously, with the economy and the way property transactions occur or when they're not occurring. But currently, we're looking at $5 million in that ballpark, and that's a good source of funds for facilities. And then again, looking at general tax as an opportunity to reinvest in some of our facilities or perhaps build new facilities to address some of the highest priorities. That's very quick, very high level, and there's a lot to talk about with capital, but we wanted to give a little bit about some of those things that we need to do in terms of ongoing capital maintenance, and then perhaps a strategy for addressing some of the higher priority facility needs. So the mayor was going to talk about this last step or slide and kind of talk about where we'd like to go.
But Ted did it for me, so I'm happy. Thank you, Ted. That was a good presentation. When I started 7.5 years ago, we weren't, because we're just coming out of the recession, not putting a whole lot of money into our capital facilities. And what happens is, as you know, with the county courthouse, the longer you go without investing in them, the more expensive the investments become. So especially with the municipal court and Watcom, two buildings, Watcom I would say is the #1 priority because it needs so much investment to just be okay. And then the municipal court building because it has a bunch of health, mold. The facility itself is not very easy to program. So I think that what we'd like to do is look at the guidelines that the councils have already adopted and come back with some priorities lists for addressing how we would go about and what we would need to do to potentially build something new that could take care of multiple needs instead of just one, not a separate thing for this and a separate thing for that. And especially when you look at Watcom, Muni Court, their storage for the police department. I mean, there's a kind of a case that could be made for a public safety, some kind of a public safety building that would take in a lot of the needs we have and then free up property we have to do something else with, whether it's create housing or or something else. So it's kind of part of our long-term property management, surplusing, what would we do? Because we wouldn't potentially need property in a residential area on Alabama if we were doing something different with Whatcom. So you will be getting this before the biennial budget adjustments that we make for your consideration. And obviously, if you have any input or you want to do some work sessions, we're happy to do that too. But I do feel that I was happy that we can put $600,000 in a year. Some of that comes from Clean Green. I think when we shut down Clean Green, we put money into capital and environmental cleanup. But I think there's an opportunity there to increase that amount because the need is far greater than what we see. The good thing about investing in capital for me is when you invest in capital, you create revenue and you create jobs. So investing in capital kind of is a multi-pronged benefit because we can help put people to work in an appropriate way without just creating something. And obviously, as construction goes on, there are resources that come to the city that then we can spend on the things that don't generate money. So I'm very bullish on making sure that we're investing in our capital for all those reasons.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Yeah, this is a good start, and you were right when you said the recession really hit us hard, and we really couldn't spend much. So I'll speak for Terry here. I think Terry and I will be more than happy to come when you build a new Borneman and Knudsen Municipal Court building. We'll come to the ribbon cutting ceremony. I think it'll be great. Thanks.
Councilmember Lillquist.
So I appreciate you referring to potential to put several facilities in the same building. That also was identified by the FAST as a strategy, is to co-locate facilities, and even to think of things like police facilities and libraries could go together, to really think creatively about what could be put together. So I would suggest to you to not be afraid to be bold about coming up with, a true long-term solution to these long-term needs. Maybe we'll have to back off something less bold, but I would like to see the bold alternative also.
Well, when you talk about locating Whatcom in one place with fire, do dispatch as a separate thing, that's pretty bold.
Pretty bold.
Yeah.
Councilmember Barker.
Two things. One, when I was at the small city mayor's meeting, Executive Laus discussed now that the Whatcom is really encompassed by almost the entire county. I think we have Sumas pulled in now, or is that just the last one that's left out that we don't have an agreement with?
I think Sumas is the last one to be pulled in. They're not in yet.
And so his suggestion was, it made sense that the city was in charge of all this before, but maybe it makes more sense for the county to be in charge. So sometimes there might be opportunities for us to pull out of something that really is a larger county responsibility. So I would, if there's conversations there, I like the idea of lining up the goals. I think in working with Muni and police, and then of course knowing fire, and I could perceive a justice center, something that aligns the police department with Muni Court, has a front end and a back end, and then of course has housing and other things above it. So I like the idea of, you have to get creative. And I do like the idea of trying to align all of these goals, the environmental goals. I think it's still a little bit confusing when you don't see all of those things that line up together that we could put and then find out how much that is. And my understanding is we were going to spend the retreat. Really, these were going to be prepping sessions, and we were going to dive in a little bit deeper so we don't get right up into the mid-biennium. There was some confusion on what we were going to do at the retreat, so I just want to make sure we were all on the same page.
I'd like to bring that up, pardon me, under old and new.
Okay.
Yeah. Councilmember Lillquist.
Yeah, one final thing, going back to the amount of money being spent on arterial repaving. You said that's currently around $2.5 million per year. It sounds like that's almost all from the Transportation Benefit District. Is that correct?
Yeah, the TBD, half of it goes to resurfacing. Yeah, that's true. So it's very close to all of it because the other $2 million, that's street, and it changes. Sometimes we use TBD for larger capital projects, sometimes we use that 2 million, that's the general sales tax, depending on how projects have already been budgeted. A lot of the times that's matching towards grants. So generally, most of the resurfacing, it's 2.5 million a year, generally is what the TBD is.
See, and I go back to the fact that when we looked at passing, and the people did indeed approve the passage of the TBD, that money was supposed to be in addition to what we were already spending. We were already spending, I'm going to make it up, somewhere around $1.5 million, and at that time we'd double that with TBD funds. But if it's not additional too, if it instead becomes a replacement, then we kind of haven't made nearly the progress that we ideally would like to have made, right? It was supposed to be bigger than that by now.
Right, well, remember the street fund used to get 50% of the sales tax, and now we get less than 40%. And so the street fund just now gets the same amount that we got in 2005.
It's just disappointing that we haven't, even though we've tried, we have not made much progress on upping that number.
Yeah, that money was directed to what the council felt were higher priorities.
Mayor Kelly.
Yeah, I think April made a good point. We had a meeting about Watcom and how we were going to look at it about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and that was my recommendation, is that we look at how we would consolidate, and then how the big A, I call them the big A, like when they took over Medic One. So it was a countywide thing, and they were the countywide administrator. And we need to keep doing that with things that really should be countywide. So I agree with that. But that's kind of a policy decision too, not just a capital decision. But we have, as we expand our fire services, we have a separate fire dispatch, and that potentially could be used for something else directly related to fire and EMT then. And then we have dispatches its own. But that's the idea that I'll talk about until the end of my days in the future, I can see. And then you guys will be left figuring out if that's a good idea or not. But I'll just tell you, I think it's a great idea. Many other communities across the country and in our state do that, and it's very efficient.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, move on to our second item. Thank you. Second item is discussion regarding preservation of manufactured home parks in Bellingham. There are 10 manufactured home parks in Bellingham with a total of about 900 spaces. These parks and the units that they contain are some of the most affordable housing in the city. The City Council directed staff to explore methods to preserve some or all of the existing parks. Staff will present the results of our research and next steps of communication, or pardon me, next steps of recommendations. And here to take us through is Rick Sepler and David Nemens.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm joined today by David Nemens. David is a former planning director, a longtime urban design and planning consultant, and he's been engaged by the city to assist us in developing our policy approach. No doubt a review of the memorandum talked about the many complexities of this issue, and a thoughtful approach, provided that there's no immediate risk to any of the existing parks and none has been identified, allows us to really consider the best path forward to achieve the policy end. I should also note, Council would be aware that we are advancing in the docket this year a number of policies that really are supportive of the manufactured home parks that are in existence. They will serve for whatever outcomes we come up with as the beginning policy base to help talk about future city action. In doing that, we sent you a couple of memorandums. The first really summated what we've learned to date. It was a restating of the information that we found to be true. I'm going to kind of go over that one with you quickly, and then I will turn to David, and he's going to sort of talk about the bigger and broader issues, the kind of approaches we're starting to get our arms around. As you'll note, we have some things we wish to do immediately, which we think in any case are in the city's best interest. But those longer term issues, those issues that really shape policy, need that careful consideration. So to start off, just so we're all on the same page, we've concluded that manufactured home parks are one of the most affordable means of achieving home ownership in our community. And they are encumbered to some degree because in some cases the residents own their land, the lots underneath them. In those cases, they're at least amount of risk. However, in the model that's prevalent in many cases, residents own their units, but individuals own the park. They pay rent to cover various things, utilities, maintenance, and the actual unit they're on. Hence the potential problem if a land transitions into a higher or better use according to what's allowed by code and market demands, it could affect displacement of the residents. As council will recall, there are a number of protective measures that have been established in state law, including offering the park itself to the residents. But sometimes the price point on land rapidly is beyond the measure of individuals to put together, though sometimes that could be affected. In still other cases, government steps in because they want to preserve this type of housing and acts almost as a banker to help facilitate it and get that ownership component done. I do think that there are some threads that are nationwide we have not seen yet, and that is in other parts of the states, United States, we've seen sort of the private equity firms who've purchased these parks and basically with a almost captive audience because there's limited opportunity to take the existing units and relocate them elsewhere. We have no vacant slots and they don't fit in neatly into zoning categories or building code. Though I should note that there's a bill that went through the House and was approved and is now in the Senate that's changing a little bit about some of the relocation, trying to provide some relief so there would be alternatives. We'll see how that reconciles and gets to the governor's office before we comment on its efficacy and how it fit in this process. I should note that in looking at the choices that are out there, we acknowledge that many of the residents that we have are of a class where they're on fixed or low income. And that creates more of a public purpose for our direct involvement. And that's an important consideration as you start weighing the policy objectives. And that the comp plan, without any of the amendments that are pending, already supports affordable housing. And it supports affordable housing across the spectrum from renters to owners and to provide choice for incomes. And I do think where we're at now is that we see in other markets the rising land values have specifically changed the dynamics, where they were fine investments, they had a good relationship for many years, but now the underlying dirt may be worth more for some other use, and hence the need to find a solution. At this point, after reviewing that fact pattern and looking at the options that we've discussed with you previously, we have 3 specific recommendations that we'd be looking for direction today to implement those and bring those forward for council consideration. The first is, while 1 year is provided by state law, we don't think that's adequate to be able to either help the current residents or the residents with the aid of the city to put together a package that's necessary to assure ownership, future ownership, and we'd recommend we add an additional year. As noted in the background materials, and David could speak to this subsequently, other jurisdictions have added processes. We do have the basis to add additional time. Seems prudent for all parties. And secondly, we want to ensure that it's acting in a timely manner and not in haste, that we consider options and we have the ability to try different approaches rather than be forced to have a crisis to respond. The second is, although the Department of Commerce has done a number of wonderful materials for how, almost a handbook, on how owners can purchase, unit owners can purchase their land, it's going to take some time. It's extraordinarily complex, and we want to prepare ourselves so that should we be approached, we would have already considered it. We'd have all our materials together. We can advise them well on how to proceed, and we think it's in the public interest to help them achieve that end. And finally, we really should set the sort of the parameters and the structure for when the city might see itself in a position where it would want to step up and sort of be that banker role. With the idea that the monthly payments for rent would eventually extinguish the debt, whatever the city lent to do this. And we want to make sure we're not lending credit, that it's structured in a way that other communities have used, and it'll be consistent with the state constitution. So those are the three that we think are immediate. We think that it's prudent to act on those. What I think we could do is, before we discuss those, we should really talk about those longer-term focus, because I think you really want to see the breadth of solutions we're considering. And I'm going to turn that over to David to present.
Thank you, Rick. My name again is David Nemmens. I'm a planning consultant, former community development director at several cities. The department has asked me to assist with some research on this matter, and I'm going to go through my March 15th memo very briefly, but hit all the different approaches we identified in the research, and then focus on the one that the department is recommending for further investigation, which is zoning revisions. But as Rick mentioned, one of the techniques, preservation techniques we encountered, probably the most powerful one, though not without its own challenges, is the acquisition. And there's a broad range of acquisition models, and I'll be happy to answer questions about those, but they all involve either the current residents or some government or not-for-profit entity such as a land bank acquiring the park and then returning the park, making it a stable home for the people who are living there now. Again, issues with that, as with all these solutions, so I'll be happy to answer questions. Land use designation or zone overlay is the one that the department is recommending in the memo that Rick just summarized. That just means setting up a manufactured housing park zone, which most cities don't have. And most or all, Bellingham doesn't have it, and all of your manufactured housing parks right now are zoned for other uses, and either the park is a permitted use or it's a legally non-conforming use. Now, I've gone through and noted some local cities that have adopted this approach: Portland, SeaTac, Linwood, City of Seattle very recently. In fact, as I was revising this, Seattle enacted an emergency moratorium to try to save its two remaining mobile manufactured home parks, and they were actually virtually one, a larger one and a small one adjacent to it. So I will say that it seems a lot more productive to be addressing this issue before the horse has gotten out of the barn, and that is a very positive thing. Now, setting up a zone would require, its land use action would require either supporting comprehensive plan amendments, or if those are currently in process, you may be able to proceed without that, but it'd be a very time and labor intensive public process involving environmental analysis and determination and hearings well publicized before the Planning Commission, the recommendation and more meetings and possibly more hearings if the council so desires in front of the City Council. So it is a fairly staff effort intensive option. Also, I should point out, without getting too much down in the weeds, City of Portland did not did not redesignate all of its existing manufactured home parks to this new zone. They did an analysis of each one, and in one case, they determined that that park, which was industrially zoned and was part of a industrial growth area that had been identified in their comp plan, was more important to the city as industrial land, future industrial land, than it was as a mobile home park. And that didn't get redesignated. It was a lengthy, now obviously Portland is a larger city, but this is a printout of the document they prepared on a staff level when they were analyzing the various parks and the different options for preserving manufactured housing parks. So if the city wants to go down that path, it is something that's been an approach that's been adopted by many local jurisdictions. It has advantages and disadvantages. Be happy to answer questions about that. It isn't really a preservation method per se, in the sense that it doesn't guarantee that those manufactured housing parks are going to be operated in perpetuity. It just limits the landowners' options for other uses. It's liable to meet opposition from some of those property owners. On the other hand, it does, in most cases, will preserve the parks in the short run. It'll allow time for the city to study additional options, and it gives the city time to work collaboratively with the park owners. Now, Linwood is an example of that, where I met recently with the former Linwood Community Development Director. He retired in February, so he's still pretty current on what happened there. And besides enacting a land use and zoning designation for the manufactured housing parks, they offered a number of incentives to the owners of those parks to, at least in 5-year increments, get some kind of agreement with them to keep the parks open and maintain them as affordable housing in exchange for different things I've outlined in my memo, including discounted rates on utilities that were owned by the city, and free permits for infrastructure improvements to the parks. So you can discuss with your legal staff the city's ability to do that, or other legal issues about that. In any event, that's my quick summary. I don't want to take up more of your time, but I'd be happy to take as much time as you'd like answering questions. And that includes you, Rick, if there's anything you want me to go into in further detail.
So our ask to conclude is on to develop the near-term responses and direction to proceed on that. And then we would like to further investigate the nuances of some of the approaches that David just described for regulatory constraints and opportunities, prepare perhaps a comparison of some of the different pros and cons with each of the methods, or the nuance of those methods and what they could achieve, and come back to you then. We'd ask for direction either to return to the committee of the whole or to go to the planning committee to work on that second phase.
Okay, Councilmember Barker, then Councilmember Knudsen.
Thank you for your report. I noticed that Tumwater wasn't included in your report, and they recently were litigated, and they made it through the Ninth Circuit. So it's just an example of an ordinance that actually did the zoning, if I remember correctly. And so had you looked into that?
No, but I will.
Oh, okay.
I am familiar on that. That's the case that's often cited as the ability to proceed. It was one that property owners approached as a takings. The court held that there was public purpose to ensure its use. There are not a lot of, to be fair, there are a lot of specific facts in that may or may not transfer. So we'd really want to be sure about our applicability.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, I'm glad we're having this discussion, because when you think of 894 units and all of a sudden, boom, they have no place to go, that would be catastrophic. But I have a question on number 3 where it says public-private for residents to buy out. And Greg might have the answer to this question. Greg, when James Street's estate was bought out by their residents, we had no role in that, did we? We didn't. We didn't. We did not. Okay. But under this scenario, we could. If they came to us and were having trouble financing that, then that's where you come in with the public-private partnership.
If we establish our parameters of what public purpose is, which is really the starting point, we have to show we're meeting the public purpose to assist in this, that there's a population of ownership patterns we wish to preserve because they're low income, then we'd be able to do something. And Bainbridge Island did this. That's the most notable case. I think you mentioned it in a prior memo, where they actually helped finance it. And as I understand it, I think they're out of it now. In essence, the residents were able to pay off the note that helped purchase.
Councilmember Borneman, then Lillquist.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see that this is finally before us. This is an issue the council actually brought forward before your time, Rick, when the trailer court on Telegraph was closing. Well, we got the notice that they were closing, and they ended up closing because they were going to build, and then it set their dormant. Everybody's out of houses, and we had asked that some measures be, but it was one of those that got lost in the ether. So I think it's a time that's come that we need to move forward in looking at these issues. I'm just really glad we didn't have another closure in the meantime before we are able to act. As land prices and houses prices go up, it's putting all these parks at greater risk. So I'm, yes, very much in favor of exploring those 3 recommendations and the zoning one. So.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I appreciate Councilman Borneman bringing up that previous closure. Just like earlier today, we were talking about the closure of the Albertsons grocery store, which created a public policy problem. This is the exact same thing, and I don't think we'll necessarily have a warning. Staff says they've heard no rumors that a conversion is coming. Well, we may not see it coming. So the memo says that you know, an investor kind of squeezing a captive market may or may not be of a concern. To me, it is a concern. Is, plural. I mean, is, present tense. So I'm in favor of exploring all 3 of these and moving forward. I think number 1 is probably the easiest to move forward on fastest, maybe as a separate piece. I think that it's true that acquisition is the only reliable and stable means. It makes no sense to force a current owner to own a piece of property they don't want to own and operate it and use it in a way they don't want to use it, but it makes a great deal of sense to put that into new hands of ownership for whom that kind of ownership and that use does make sense. So anything we can do to aid in those changes in ownership, I would appreciate. I see that both in number 2 and number 3. And my question is, how close can we get to having a near turnkey model so that when someone did come to us with some short notice and great concern, how prepared could we be? How close to a turnkey can we get, given that we don't know what's going to happen or which park's going to be under threat of change?
Well, to be fair, I think they're all unique. There's some similarities. However, the purchase models are fairly well defined, the process at least. There's some questions we need to handle, and that's if the city steps up to help facilitate this, do we have a guarantee they're going to stay affordable? I mean, they are a depreciating investment if we establish it. That's an issue that needs to be discussed and talk about it, especially if we retain a long-term presence in the operation or the facility. On the other hand, if we assist people, then clearly it's a private matter. We've achieved the end. So the truth somewhere there, I think we can get the pieces together so we're nimble with them, but we're going to have to recombinate them based on the specific one that comes before us.
Right, but if we have 2 or 3 models as developed as possible, so they can pick the one that works, or hopefully we can pick the one that works soonest. I don't know, as close as we can get to kind of a turnkey model or models, that'd be nice.
Councilmember Barker.
Okay. Well, I think you're asking for that first part, the implemented immediately. And so a couple of things, my response to that, and I just want to state into the record, because I just want to make sure it's documented. So this is in compliance. I think what we're moving forward is in compliance with the GMA, preserving existing affordable housing types, supporting the continuum of variety of housing types, and supporting affordable home ownership. So I just want to make sure the record is clear that that we're really following GMA process. I have two things I'd like to discuss in the implement it immediately. Currently, House Bill Report ESHB 1582 has several things regarding manufactured home parks, but they are actually advocating, and Ishbel Dickens, who had joined us, I think, last year when we had organized those meetings, is testifying at this very moment for moving from the 1 year at the state to 3 years. And so we may want to just go ahead and consider if it has enough power to be moving, it's looking very positive, instead of 2 years, 3 years. And so I'd like to know why or why not. And then why not go ahead at this point and set a moratorium, since we know that if we are moving in this direction, which I think we are, why not go ahead and add a fourth of putting a moratorium on these? So those are my two questions before I agree on the.
I'm aware of the change in duration, and we'll see if the bill passes both chambers and signed. Certainly that would solve a lot of issues. We picked an additional year because we felt very safe that it wasn't taking of the rights of the property owner. But it seems like the legislature can help define that for us, and we'd welcome it. 3 years would be great. Moratoria is when we have an imminent risk. And if we believe there was an imminent risk, it's something for us to consider. The reason is that when you establish a moratoria, you have to do a work plan that puts this to the top of the heap of all the other work. So if you did do a moratorium on this, certainly you would be assured that there would be no applications that would come into the time, but it starts a timeline. And that timeline is we need to have a public hearing within 90 days. We need to complete it in a timely manner. Otherwise, it too can be subject to litigation. So our sense on this was those are for the ones where we feel the risk is so great that without action we would preclude an opportunity. In this case, we've seen no pre-applications being submitted nor inquiries submitted for redevelopment. Those are all required before any action could be taken or an application could be submitted for vesting. So we didn't think it warranted that approach. We also think it's one where the staffing and the process we have matches the urgency to the jurisdiction. We can continue to move forward and achieve the end. So that's why we recommended it this way.
Would you clarify for me, so we start this process and in 40 days, somebody comes in with a pre-application to change use. What, can we, at that moment, go ahead and do a moratorium, or are we now obligated because they've started the process where we can't intervene on that?
So two things here. You only are vested when you have a complete application in. So pre-application doesn't vest you to anything. And secondly, I wouldn't want a park owner to be watching, to be concerned they need to rush something forward now to preserve a vested right. Our hope is to have a principled discussion on the merits, to consider both the property owner's rights as well as the residents' rights, and to come up with a good blended solution that preserves both. We certainly, council has the right to consider that technique of using a moratorium at their pleasure if they perceive risk. So it's allowed by state law.
Mayor Kelly.
Yeah, just to clarify, because that was the same question I was going to ask, is if there's an indication that that might be happening, then we could still do a moratorium.
One could. My hope would be, again, we wouldn't want to threaten we do a moratorium as a means of now prompting an action from someone. We would rather have them come to our meetings and offer their point of view and consider them work together. We are unaware of any proposal that's coming forward for the parks.
Councilmember Barker.
And I don't know if it's Alan or Peter, but what is that, just hypothetically, somebody is already in the process and comes in 30 days and decides to start the pre-application process. It's not looking like we're going to be able to work with them, and we implement an emergency moratorium. Are we in better footing as a city to be able to impose that, and by doing it now or by doing it then, or are we in the same boat whether we do it at now or then? It just seems like once they've initiated that process, to me, but I don't know the court system, are we less likely to be able to impose them not closing the park?
I would prefer to address that in executive session.
Okay.
Committee.
Well, I didn't hear you say you would be opposed to an additional 2 years if the council had decided that.
Again, just to restate, we thought one was highly defensible adding on based on the other jurisdictions' processes they had established, all were about a year, additional year. If 3 years are proposed by state law, there's no need for us to take action. But likely when this returns to you, we might know the resolution of that state bill, and it may be a moot issue. Again, when we started writing these approaches, that was in play, but you never know how far it gets in the process.
Committee, further questions? I'll just chime in then. I do support rather the expansion of at least the 1 year, and I would just, as someone who grew up in one of these places back in Wisconsin, these are working class folks, or they're retired working class folks with not a lot of income coming in, and so I have grave concerns about this issue in general, and I would support some type of rezoning to protect these places where people live. Committee, anything further?
Yeah, I have one. So are you saying that you would support 2 years instead of 1 year on this?
I would support an additional year or 2 years, whatever the,
Yeah.
I would want to see what Olympia comes back with.
Oh, you want to wait and see for that? Yeah, for me,
Well, I think
it's-
I think we could do an additional year here.
Okay.
And if it goes to 3, then it's moot, so. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Councilmember.
Well, you're in charge then.
Okay. Committee, anything further? Do you have direction?
To clarify, my understanding is you'd like us to proceed on the 3 we asked for direction on today, and would you like this going to the Planning Committee or to Committee of the Whole for working out the issues associated with the policy issues of zoning?
Okay, committee?
I'm on both, so I'm happy with either.
Planning?
It's a planning issue.
Send it to planning.
Planning.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Are we going to talk, because you need direction on the rest of this too, right?
I'm hearing on the first 3 proceed, and then on the last one to come back to the Planning Committee. And I'm understanding from the nature of the questions, please confirm that you'd like us to advance that.
So my other question, we had the fair housing report, and we were in compliance because we really didn't have a significant population, if I remember correctly, of marginalized communities to really, at the federal level, say we didn't have fair housing compliance. But there was some suggestion from maybe it was Samia or somebody else that we might take a further dive ourselves if we think that there might be some fair housing situations. And I think this would be a real opportunity to look at who's living in these areas, and it could provide further, I think, legal impetus for us to move forward. I'm thinking of one in particular where we have just of school-age children, almost 100 children living in one park, and then they all have little siblings that aren't quite in school yet. So I think if we were to look at that on not only income but race and age, we would certainly see that we have a very high level of folks living in these situations. So, and I think it would help us to give a better picture as we're looking at the housing equity assessment and what we have. And I will just say, as you're moving forward, coming into the Planning Committee, I certainly support the zoning. And I don't feel like we have to have an affordability component. It's already proven that these are far more affordable. And what we're trying to do is not put, we have very few public dollars. So to put more public dollars in something that's already affordable and we're protecting to stay affordable, I'd rather use that money somewhere else unless they were able to purchase and do a payback model. So I'll just give you that direction.
Mayor.
And I guess I'd ask, as I always do, what's the expectation for coming back with this research? Because I don't think it's simple to do.
Which research?
You
The
just
fair
asked.
housing?
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, we already have the data from the school district. That's pretty easy.
It's still, every time we do something, it takes our existing staff away. And I think this is very important, but I'd like to know when you expect it, because otherwise, I think that you get frustrated and you keep asking when it's coming, and I think we would need to know when you would like, is it something we need right away, or can we kind of put it off a bit while they do the other things that they're working on right now?
I mean, you have excellent staff. I don't know how difficult this would be or not difficult, so I would say to continue to move forward with this sooner than later for me on manufactured housing protections, period. And if in that process you're able to find ways to solidify the fact that we're moving forward on this because we are dealing with a population that's more vulnerable than other populations, then that would be great. I don't think there has to be a specific study. It was a suggestion that it could help us if we were to get litigated later. We'd have more information.
Yeah, well, I heard it as something that you thought was valuable, so
Definitely.
I was taking it seriously. Okay, well then, you're leaving it kind of up to staff to work that into their work plan as they're doing this other stuff?
Councilmember Stone.
So in response to that, I guess I was just thinking about, in discussing possible moratoriums or emergency ordinances, I think the timing has to do with the assessed risk, in that I think we've made clear what the concern is, right? Not wanting to run against sort of being taken by surprise. There's no feelers on the ground now that there's going to be a potential change in use or something of that sort, but wanting to stay ahead of that. So I guess we're dependent upon, the intel that the staff has. But.
And I guess I'll just go back to the fallback position, which is, would the council not feel comfortable if somebody came forward for their pre-app in us asking you to put together a moratorium, which then would still protect the people in the parks? If somebody would, it'd be a good thing to know now.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I'm comfortable with preparing and triggering a moratorium if necessary because this issue is being publicly discussed now and has been for months. I don't think we're going to be surprising the owners of mobile home parks if they're paying attention, or many of the residents. So if we can continue moving forward at a reasonable, moderately fast but not hasty pace, I feel comfortable with triggering a moratorium if necessary because I don't think we'll be the ones creating the haste.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody's okay with that, because I think that was the sense of the department and the director, that there would be an opportunity to still protect the parks.
Okay, committee. Director Suffolk.
Just, if I could, again, we think there's, some of the operators are not problematic. They provide a good environment. We shouldn't penalize them either. They have a voice in this discussion. I think we fairly should discuss it on the merits and figure out what's there. And similarly, I think David pointed to the assessment of the various parks. Not all of the parks, by our own plans, are slated for preservation. Some are ill-located and have long been considered for redevelopment. So we want to be thoughtful about which ones we advance and why.
Committee. Councilmember Bellingham.
Just to comment on the discussion that was going on about the issues we're discussing now, and also putting on planning, speeding up the equity parts and other things. I would prefer that we keep things as clean as possible with this, because I think this is really important that we move forward. And so I agree with April, with your last statement, that let's do this and get this one, because this is important, and not burden it with extra duties for staff to get this before us. So that's what I would like to see.
Do you have direction? Yes, sir. Okay. Anything else for this item, committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. Next item is minutes for approval from March 11th, 2019. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. Councilmember Vargas excused. Items for old and new. Councilmember Lillquist.
I'd like to bring up I guess now old, 2 meetings ago, I think it was, I suggested we might consider modifying what we do in the evening with regard to public comment. That is not that we engage in a back and forth with public commentators, but that if issues arise in the minds of the council that they want to ask the administration about, that we could put in a time right after public comment, that we could ask the administration about what was brought up during public comment. I suggested it before, maybe not as clearly as I hope I expressed it now. Has anybody thought about it? Is anybody interested in it? Are we interested in considering this change?
Committee? Councilmember Barker?
I suggested we do the mayor's report first, and if the mayor thinks that there's something she could address directly. I also think you give a lot of really valuable information, but by then most people have gone to bed by the time you're hearing it. So I think that might be a way to address it, where it's not each of us and throwing in our own opinion, and then you say something, then I feel like I have to say something, but she'd be speaking specifically to our current policies and her understanding of what her staff is doing. So I think it'd be valuable to have that at the beginning, and it might address your concern.
And if it doesn't, then someone could ask me a question, as you do in the mayor's report.
Okay, Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, that's not a bad idea. Michael, I fear what's going to happen with what you're suggesting. Before, I wasn't on the council yet, but I watched closely. Before, there wasn't any public comment. The meeting began, they went on with their business, and there was nothing. When Louise was council president in 1991 or 92, she instituted, with the support of the council, to have public comment. But my fear with this is, if we do get in a give and take, I think the mayor is perfectly capable, no matter who's sitting there, of responding to something that was said during public comment. One of the best parts of public comment I like, when somebody comes with a traffic problem or a neighborhood issue or some other thing, and we're not getting beat up on something else, that's good for the public works director or the mayor to respond to. But if we start getting in a give and take and open that door up, we've had some pretty rough situations where even I've been guilty of it, going back at somebody when they say something, and that's not good. So I think any controlled way you can have it. If it's a big issue and it's an issue that we have a lot to do with, I don't mind. I just don't think we should get in too much give and take with it. To me, public comment is for them to come, and if they want to call us names, they can do whatever they want. I mean, I've listened to it all these years. I mean, that's their time to come and say what they really feel. You might not agree with it, but if we start going back at it, I just don't think we should.
Councilor Lillquist.
I agree we don't want to get into a back and forth. And I think April's suggestion probably has a better chance of not getting into the back and forth. So if Kelly is willing, I'd like the council to try it. But I think right now we have another problem, which is that we appear to be mute, and it's hard for the people to know we listen.
You're far from mute.
Well, I would like to try something that will show us to be a little bit more responsive, and I do think it's appropriate for the mayor to respond to some of those items. And if it provokes a small discussion, that's fine. It'll still be between this council and the administration in our meeting.
Yeah, my problem with it is right now, many times, public comment takes over the whole night of the meeting. And we're then at the end, we're trying to rush through the real business of the city council. And if we extend this out more, that's not what public comment is for. I'm not in favor.
Councilmember Stone. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Councilmember Stone.
So I'm in support of April's recommendation that the mayor's report come immediately following public comment. And in response to the motion or proposal from Michael, I would just say that I think public comment is valuable and it's a time for people to speak. But if they're wanting dialogue with us, they have other ways to communicate with us. And most of the people who come and present at public comment are people that I've heard from through email or voicemail messages. And so their concerns are not unfamiliar to me. And I would hope that they know that I'm hearing them and are responsive in other ways.
Mayor.
A friend showed me something on my iPhone the other day, which showed a way that you, as council members, can always give the public indication that you're listening to them, and that is give them your full attention. They showed a council where everyone was on their phone, everyone was looking down, and the gentleman that was standing there ended up not testifying because he asked them if they would pay attention to him, and they were extremely rude. And I think that's one thing about our council, we're not rude. But you give people your full attention, then they know you're paying attention. And I think that maybe the president could also remind people at the beginning of public comment exactly what it's for, that this is time for you to express yourself to us in your allotted time, but we won't be, getting into a conversation with us, because April, Hannah's absolutely right. People know how to get a hold of you. What? Oh, is that part of new business?
Okay, I didn't hear a resolution on that one. It sounded like that didn't go anywhere.
I would move we follow April's recommendation to put the mayor's report after the 50-minute public comment period.
So I'll move that we put the mayor's report at the beginning, right after public comment.
Okay, beginning when?
Beginning tonight. Oh, no, sorry, beginning next meeting, sorry.
Next meeting, yeah.
Yeah, beginning the next meeting.
Okay.
Is that okay, Monet?
Let me ask a question.
After public comment.
If nothing is said that triggers anything, then is she going to give the mayor's report then?
I
Because
personally think
sometimes
it's
she has
helpful.
a lot
Yeah.
of business to take care of.
Just so you know that I'm always listening to public comment. I write down everyone's public comment here. I make a note on my mayor's report, things that I believe maybe should be addressed, that there's either probably mostly misinformation, or the fact that someone asked us to do something and we're already doing it. And I just want to put that as part of the record. When it comes at the end, or even some of the other things, people don't pay attention. And you're all tired and I'm all tired. So I won't take up too much time, Gene, I
No,
promise.
I'm just saying, if there's really stuff you have to give to us, other than commenting on public comment.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking that what you're asking me to do is do my full mayor's report then. So if there's something I'm going to alert you to, I would just do it at that time instead of at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, and I think another good reason for that is we used to, because a few of our meetings that actually went shorter, when you were appointing somebody, sometimes they would show up, and I've seen them leave because it goes on for so long. They wanted to hear us, approve them going on to a committee, and so did their family, and then they slowly walk out like 2 hours later. So I think it's just helpful. It's really the meat of some of this, and I think the community deserves it. So let's try it out for a couple meetings to see how it
Okay,
goes.
motion's been made. Was there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 6-0. 6-0. Other items for old new. I have one. This is pursuant to the retreat. So apparently there's a little bit of confusion. I was looking for some more agenda items, but earlier on, probably a month or two ago, we had talked about doing a high-level financial overview, some of which we've already done today, and then homelessness and housing was the other issue that I heard. So here's my perspective. I think that should be done right here. I think that those should be done during the business day, when we have staff members here, when we have outside third parties that can come in and make presentations or whatever the need is. Doing a retreat takes away these things, takes away the cameras. We only have an audio recording, and I don't think it's realistic that people are going to go back and listen to hours of people talking who have to identify themselves by name, and if they don't, we don't know who's talking. So I think I think that those items can be presented to us and discussed, and we can provide whatever resolution we can provide over the course of several meetings, not all in one chunk because it's just way too much. But I would say that some of those items could be done over the course of maybe 4 meetings or 6 meetings or whatever it took to do it. That's where I come from, and I'm happy to hear Councilmember Knudsen.
Anytime we can get out of retreat, I'm all for it.
Okay. Councilor Lillquist.
Well, I think there is a utility to not sitting up here in these big chairs behind this pretty wooden wall. Can we consider having a discussion in the round? I'm just trying to create an open kind of discussion that's not all Robert's Rules of Orders, motion, second, discussion, call the question. Yeah, I would like to be able to have those kind of just discussions. If taking our Saturday and going off to someplace is more than necessary, I would like to change our physical orientation of each other to each other, because I think that leads to a different kind of interaction with each other and a healthier process when we're noodling through some of these really big issues and not deciding a specific yes or no issue.
Okay. Committee, Councilmember Barker.
Well, I don't mind having it here, but I've only been part of one, and this is my 4th year. We don't travel down to Olympia together. So I'm fine having it here, down how we do our planning committee, but taking a deeper dive, we've been talking about the structural issues of the budget, and then we get into our biennium and then our mid-biennium, and we get a lot of reports, but we don't get into the meat of it and really make a determination of where we're going. That's why right now there's people that want to run the TBD a little bit early, like we did the housing, so there's some security. And they're like, well, we don't really know what you all are wanting to do. So my understanding when I made the motion and why we were asking for these presentations that Ted did was to really give us the precursor so we could dive in and really get some direction. And I know the budget is extremely important to you, Kelly, and you've been a great fiscal agent. And so that's why I wanted to do it. If we want to do that on a Thursday or a Monday or a morning or a Saturday, but I think it takes a less, I guess, constructed situation. I don't mind it being on camera whatsoever. I think they're great presentations. It would be good for the public too, but that's what I understood that we were doing when I made my motion. We were really going to dive into this and come out with some directions on where are we going with this structural issue that we have with our budget.
Okay. Mayor Kelly.
One of the things about retreats is they usually are team building more than policy direction, because I think Dan's right. When you're talking about policies, especially if we do it at Woodstock or a place like that, it doesn't accommodate the public coming, and we're not taping it, and we're not, putting it on air. So I think retreats are great for some of the reasons April said about how we work together. Are you going to catch me when I fall off the end of the board? That kind of thing. The idea of having a deeper dive about the budget, as anyone who's been budget chair knows, I've wanted to do that for a long time, and I was hoping to do it when you were finance chair, and you were finance chair, and you were finance chair. So I think it's great. And secondly, right now we're on course to deal with the county on housing and homelessness. We're doing the emergency cold weather committee, and then they've expanded which I am so happy about because I've been asking for this for a long time, expanding with the county taking the lead, our homeless plan. What is our plan for housing people? And then hopefully it'll extend to making housing affordable countywide. And it's like we need that information now rather than later, which is the direction to you. So when we sit on these committees with the county, we're all speaking with one voice. We know I think I know, I certainly know how I feel about it, and I think I know how you feel about it, but it would be good to have that opportunity. I think that because you're not talking about specific policy goals, you could talk about it at a retreat, or you could talk about it, here. But I think it's important for the administration right now to have that direction about the housing, where you'd like to see us be on housing. Because I think the county is stepping up, and I think the county is understanding that as the public health department, they are the lead on these issues countywide. And I'm excited about that. I'm happy.
Thank you. We're not taking public comment at this time, sorry. Not tonight, we will tonight. Yeah, that's correct. We just really need to have public comment during public comment. I'm sorry, those are rules. Yeah, you bet, thanks. Okay, so I think we got nowhere. So I'm going to move that we cancel the retreat and that we do the business of the council in the public eye during scheduled city council meetings.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? I hear 2 ayes and 2 noes.
I know I was going to abstain, but if I go no, then
So is it a yes or a no?
no.
No? Councilmember Borneman?
What? I said yes.
You said yes?
It was
So
3 to
that's
3.
3 to 3.
3 and 3, we'll wait till Pinky gets back to.
Okay, we'll take it tonight. Yeah, correct, okay. Yeah. Okay, Mayor Kelly.
I was going to make a suggestion for you, but I'll save it for tonight.
Okay, very good. Any other items for old new? Okay, seeing now that it's 10 past 2, that's a government joke, that clock doesn't work. We're going to go into our executive session. We have 2 items. First one is potential litigation, claim number 2019-05 and claim number 2019-06. Brady, approximately 10 minutes. Second item is Claremont versus Suter et al. Brady, approximately 10 minutes, and I'll be back here to gavel us adjourned at 3:30. Thank you.